My son Garth had graciously offered me a modest room at his house, but it was uncomfortably hot. Mid-July in Henlopen Acres was usually difficult, but this summer the heat exceeded all records. The ancient fan whirring on the bedside table was spewing hot air rather than offering respite. I flung aside the thin cover and sat on the bed trying to catch my breath. 73 isn't the optimum age to combat sleeplessness, especially when combined with the stuffiness or thoughts on how my life has altered in the last year. Following the loss of Frank, my husband of nearly 50 years, the house on Seaside Street became too empty and silent. When Garth offered to move in with them, I accepted, not because of my needs, but because of his persistence. "Mom, you can't live alone at your age," he said, not recognizing the irony in my expression. My age, I'd worked as head accountant at McDowell's Construction Company for 35 years, and even today, 8 years after retiring, old colleagues have contacted to advise on challenging issues. I could calculate tax deductions and create a budget for a huge project with my eyes closed. But to Garth, and especially Paige, I was just an elderly woman to be patronized and tolerated. I struggled for my slippers beneath the bed and put on a light robe. The clock on the wall read 2:30 in the morning. Perhaps a glass of cool water will help me sleep. As I went out into the hallway, I reflexively slowed my feet to avoid squeaking the flooring. Years of living with a chronically sleep-deprived partner had trained me to move practically softly. I saw a flash of light from behind the kitchen door and heard muffled voices. "She will never agree, Garth. You know your mother." It was Paige's voice, rough despite her attempts to speak quietly. "She owns the house and I can't just—" Garth started, but Paige interrupted him. "We need to get rid of the elderly woman and sell her house before she learns about the construction plans." I froze, felt blood drain from my face. "Old woman." Paige called me that behind my back. "If Eunice discovers that her hut is suddenly worth a fortune, she will never sell it." Paige continued. I strained against the wall, frightened my legs wouldn't support me. "A hovel, my Primorskia home, where Frank and I had reared our kid and created a rose garden that flowered every summer. I'm not convinced it's correct." Garth's voice sounded uncertain, and I knew he was hesitant, but not because of moral concerns. My son was simply terrified of the repercussions. "Right?" Paige sounded mocking. "Is it appropriate that we're in debt while her house stays empty? Is it correct that Quentin will be unable to attend a reputable institution because we lack the necessary funds? Is it right that you can't be promoted for 10 years while I'm divided between 3 jobs? 3 jobs. I choked back a sour laugh. Paige's only employment was as a realtor, and she'd had no more than 5 clients in the last 2 years. However, she was skilled at moaning about her position in life. "Okay," Garth replied after a minute. "But how she refuses to sign the selling paperwork? She already did." Paige sounded arrogant. "Remember when she got pneumonia in the winter, and we took her to the doctor? I had her sign a power of attorney, ostensibly for health insurance. She did not even read it. I covered my lips with my palm to avoid making a sound. Indeed, I'd been sick with severe pneumonia in February, and Paige had been exceptionally helpful, transporting me to the doctor and administering medication. I now understand why this spontaneous generosity occurred." "And is that legal?" Garth asked. Paige replied boldly. "I have a notary public who has certified everything retrospectively. The power of attorney authorizes me to dispose of her possessions. And given her age and recent sickness, no one would be shocked if she elected to relocate to a nursing facility." I felt my hands quiver, not from fear but from wrath. Nursing home. My son and his wife intended to place me in a nursing facility, sell my house, and steal the proceeds. What if she refuses? Garth's voice sounded concerned. "There are techniques to persuade an old person that they require continuous care." Paige's tone became businesslike. A few unintentional stumbles, a handful of missed pills, and misplaced stuff. "You'll see she's becoming distracted and forgetful, which will make you quite anxious." Garth stuttered. Paige finished for him. I already have a buyer, the New York-based financier Bruckheimer. He offers $2 million for the land without even looking at the home. He claims he'll pull it down and construct a new one anyhow. $2 million. I felt the environment around me begin to spin. My house, which Frank and I had purchased for $48,000 in the 1970s, was now worth $2 million. What's happening at Henlopen Acres? What about Frank's remains? Garth inquired gently, and it was the only time in the chat that I detected genuine worry in his voice. My heart tightened. Frank's ashes were sprinkled in the rose garden behind the home he'd torn up himself, as he had requested. Garth knew this. Jesus, Garth, it's just ashes in the ground, Paige said irritably. Nobody's going to inspect the garden before dismantling the house. If it helps, put a handful of dirt in the urn and pretend it's your beloved papa. I slumped against the wall, feeling something inside me shatter, not from the anguish of betrayal, but from the full revelation of who my son had become, a man prepared to sell his father's grave for money. When Garth inquired after a long silence, Bruckheimer is in a rush. Amber Technologies will formally unveil their campus in 2 weeks, and costs will increase even further. However, the transaction must be completed prior to the announcement, otherwise Eunice will get suspicious. So here's the thing. The tech titan is constructing a campus near my house, and the cost of property has risen. Paige, as a realtor, learned about it before anybody else. I've already found a great property in Sunny Acres, Paige explained. It's affordable, yet well kept. Her monthly payments will get a portion of the funds, while the remainder will be used for other purposes. Well, Quentin needs a car for college, and we're long overdue for some maintenance. And Tallulah, Garth responded hesitantly. She's tied to her grandmother. She'll get over it. Paige cut her off. She's 14 years old, and in a few years she'll be off to school and forget about it all. By the way, she could need some new devices and clothing. Do you want your children to have what you don't have? When I heard the sound of a chair being pulled back, I silently returned to my room. My heart pounded, but my mind was clear. Once inside my room, I softly closed the door and slipped onto my bed. My initial idea was to walk to the kitchen and express my feelings about them. However, years of dealing with numbers and contracts had taught me cold calculation. An emotional reaction would just give them an edge. They'd interpret my reaction as age-related paranoia, and perhaps even use it to demonstrate my inability to make independent judgments. No, we need to do things differently with more cunning and calculation. I discreetly unlocked the drawer in my bedside table and took out the tiny notepad I usually kept with me. It was an accountant's practice to scribble down key ideas and data. In the faint light of the nightlight, I began to make a plan. First, I needed to determine whether the power of attorney Paige had indicated existed and was legally binding. If it was, I needed to rescind it right now. Second, I need to learn more about Amber Technologies' ambitions and how they will impact the value of my home. Most crucial, I need to depart before Paige begins her plot to isolate me and declare me disabled. I remembered my old acquaintance Winifred Oakes, a retired nurse who lived in Lewis, a little town about half an hour from Henlopen Acres. We hadn't seen one other in years, but maintained in touch via phone conversations. Winnie was a dependable person with a large home inherited from her late husband. Now we had to decide what to bring with us paperwork, first and foremost, passport insurance, bank cards, medication, some clothing, and of course the photo of Frank that I always kept by my bed. Another idea occurred to me, my funds. Upon retirement, I received a fair severance payout, the most of which I invested with the assistance of my old coworker, Morton Fisk, who had become a financial advisor. Neither Garth nor Paige knew the actual amount of my funds. I'd always been fiscally responsible and never talked money with my family. I glanced at my watch. It was almost 3 a.m., too late for phone calls, but I could start packing. Slowly and deliberately, I unlocked the closet and took out the tiny travel bag I kept in case of doctor's visits. Paige never entered my room without knocking, not out of respect for my privacy, but because she was afraid of the aging scent, as she once called it, and assumed I couldn't hear. I packed several changes of underwear, 2 shirt slacks, a sweatshirt for evenings by the sea, which may be cool even in the summer, a toothbrush, and other essentials. I've decided to pack the documents tomorrow. When the home was vacant, Garth would go to work, Paige would go to client meetings, and the kids would be preoccupied with their summer activities. When I finished with the bag, I tucked it away in the farthest part of the closet, under the boxes of winter items that no one looked in at the peak of summer. Then I strolled back to bed and opened my mobile phone, which Garth had given me for Christmas last year. "So you may always contact us if something happens," he explained. Now I realized why he was concerned. Control. I located the cab number in my contacts and mentally calculated the distance to Lewis. About 20 miles and a half-hour travel. The cost was around $50. I had around $200 in cash in my wallet, which should be sufficient for the first time. The strategy started to take form. I'd have to depart during the day when no one was home to gain time before my absence was noticed. But before I vanished, I had to leave a trail that would make them suspect the worst and fear. I had no want to scare my kid, but I saw the need of this step. The more time I had, the better I could plan for the confrontation. I walked back to the bed and laid down, attempting to slow my breathing. I had a rough day ahead of me tomorrow, so I wanted to save my strength. Despite the shock and rage, my thinking was clear. Perhaps for the first time in a long time, I felt fully alive. After all, Paige was correct about one thing. The elderly woman indeed need to be disposed of, but not in the way they had intended. I was about to say goodbye to the character of defenseless elderly woman that they had imposed on me. It was time to demonstrate what it meant to misjudge Eunice Trotter. With that thinking, I closed my eyes, and unexpectedly sleep came quickly. I slept better than I had in months, and when I awakened to the sound of my alarm clock, I already had a plan of action prepared for the following few days. I spent the following 3 days going through the house and packing. I felt resentful every time Garth inquired whether I was okay, with a worried expression on his face that suddenly appeared false. He portrayed the concerned son like a third-rate theatrical actor, completely unaware that I already knew the script from beginning to end. By Thursday, my strategy was complete. I selected that day of the week for a reason. Garth had his monthly office report, which generally lasted late into the evening. Paige had client appointments all day. Quentin had gone to the beach with friends, and Tallulah was at summer arts camp until 6 p.m. I got up early, long before anybody else in the house awoke, took my morning medicine, and even prepared coffee for everyone, which was a regular part of my routine that I didn't want to disrupt. Any change from my typical behavior may have raised suspicions. "Good morning, Mom." Garth entered the kitchen, buttoning his shirt as he went. "You are early today." I could not sleep. I gave him a cup of coffee. "You have a busy day today, don't you?" He groaned as he reviewed the quarterly report. "I'll be returning late, so don't expect me for supper." "Of course, sweetie." I smiled, felt the mask of civility form on my face. "I'm having a reading day today, finally finishing the detective novel you sent me." Garth nodded, obviously not listening. He was never interested in what I was reading or doing during his absence. Tallulah, not him, gave me the book I mentioned as a birthday gift. After everyone had departed, the home fell into peaceful quiet. I allowed myself to stand in the center of the living room, staring at the photographs on the walls, the joyful family on the beach, Quentin and Tallulah's high school portraits, Garth and Paige's wedding shot, and not a single image of Frank or myself from my younger years. It seemed as if my life before moving in with my son wasn't important. Without further ado, I got down to business. I removed the prepared bag from the closet and added the remainder of my items. A photo album I had discreetly taken from the garage, where I stored ancient family heirlooms, some jewelry with sentimental significance, and a leather folder with crucial documents that I kept in my room. Then I phoned a cab and scheduled a 45-minute meeting at the corner of the block. I didn't want the automobile to pull straight up to the home. The neighbors in Henlopen Acres were incredibly perceptive about other people's lives. While I waited for the given time, I had to set up the appropriate staging. I returned to my room and examined it with a critical eye. Normally, I maintained everything in immaculate order, a habit formed during years of living with Frank, who was almost painfully meticulous. Now, however, I needed to convey perplexity and despair. I took garments out of drawers and spread them across the room. I knocked down a chair. I collected empty medicine bottles from the medicine cabinet and spread them on the bedside table before sitting down at the little desk and pulling out a piece of paper. The note was the central component of the entire scheme. It had to be unpleasant enough to cause fear, but it didn't have to point clearly to suicide, which may result in a quick search for the corpse and a call to the police, which I wanted to avoid in the early hours of my absence. After considering numerous choices, I decided on the following text. I overheard everything. I understand your plans. Do not search for me where you intended to bury me alive. It is better to die free than to live in jail. Farewell. I purposefully made the handwriting uneven, as if my hand was trembling when I wrote it. I placed the letter on the bed opposite the practically empty sedative bottle. I'd been progressively throwing the pills down the toilet for the last 2 days, making it appear as if I'd consumed too many. I glanced at the clock and realized it was time to depart. I took one final look around the room. The mess appeared natural, not planned. I took my luggage, put on a light coat. Despite the summer heat, the air conditioning in the taxi was usually too chilly, and strolled silently out the back door. The garden behind Garth's house was tiny and unkempt, with sun-bleached grass and stunted shrubs. Paige always claimed that gardening was a waste of time. I proceeded down the tiny path to the gate leading to the next street, then out into the alley where no one could see me. It was approximately 300 yards to the corner where I had planned to meet the cab. I walked slowly, yet steadily, feeling unusually light. For the first time in a long time, I was acting fully on my own free will, without regard for other people's expectations. The cab was already waiting for me, an ancient car, with worn upholstery, and an elderly driver who stepped out to assist me with my bag. "Where are we going, ma'am?" he said as I slid into the back seat. "To Lewis, Maple Street 23, I replied, and I'd appreciate your restraint if someone inquired. The driver nodded and looked in the rearview mirror. "Family matters." I smiled faintly. "Do not worry, ma'am. I've been in this profession for 30 years, have seen everything, and know how to keep my mouth shut." On the journey to Lewis, I looked out the window at the passing countryside. Henlopen Acres had always been a lovely community, but in recent years things had begun to change. There were an increasing number of new residences, glass boxes, with the appearance of modernism, replacing the old comfortable structures with history. Perhaps it explains the rising interest in my neighborhood, another wave of gentrification. After 40 minutes, we arrived at Winifred's house. It was a simple one-story building with a large veranda and a well-kept garden. Winnie had always enjoyed flowers. I gave the driver a big tip and headed for the front door. Winifred answered the door when the first ring rang, as if she had been waiting on the threshold. She appeared amazingly energetic at 75, tall and straight, with short gray hair and penetrant blue eyes. Eunice held me hard. "Come in soon. I have already made tea." We entered the living room, a comfortable space with soft sofas and bookcases along the walls. There was a teapot and 2 glasses on the coffee table. "I assume this isn't simply a nice visit," Winnie commented as we sank into our chairs. "You sounded nervous over the phone." Last night, while everyone was sleeping, I contacted Winifred and simply described the problem without going into detail. Now it's time to reveal everything. My son and his wife were preparing to sell my house without my permission and place me in a nursing home, I said calmly, despite the fact that I was still boiling with rage within. Paige had somehow obtained power of attorney for my estate. Winnie frowned. "That is unlawful if you did not approve it. Apparently, I signed something without reading it while I was unwell during the winter. That was stupid of me, but I trusted them. I shake my head. They now believe they can just get rid of me and cash in on my property, which has suddenly become quite valuable as a result of certain development plans. Amber Technology. Winnie nodded. It's all the talk around town. They're creating a massive campus between Henlope and Acres and Lewis. Real estate values have soared. So you knew I was startled. Of course I did. It's not a secret anymore, at least not in recent weeks. I am amazed you haven't heard. I grinned cruelly. Garth and Paige carefully filter the information that comes to me. There is no local news, only national networks. I've even quit getting newspapers ostensibly to save money. Winnie shakes her head. So, what are you planning to do? First, I have to formally cancel this power of attorney. Second, obtain proof of their schemes. Third, find out how valuable my home has become. For the first, you'll need a competent lawyer. Winnie stroked her chin thoughtfully. My acquaintance specialized in geriatric patients. He is a really principled individual. That would be excellent. I gripped her hand warmly. And as for proof, Winnie instantly brightened. My nephew Daryl may be able to help. He is a private investigator in Wilmington, but he is now visiting me. I lifted my eyebrows in amazement. A detective. That sounds like a book. Oh, Daryl is really good, Winnie said triumphantly. An ex-cop went into private company 5 years ago, specializes in family law, unfaithful spouses, missing relatives, and inheritance fraud. I believe he would be interested in your situation. I'm not sure if I can afford a private investigator. I grimaced while mentally calculating my funds. Nonsense. Winnie rejected me. You are aware that Daryl is my sister Eleanor's son. Do you remember how you assisted her with her tax audit 10 years ago? He still recalls how you saved the family company. I'm sure he'd be pleased to help. I assisted Sister Vinnie with a complicated tax matter years ago, but I never imagined it would come in good in the future. He should be back for supper, Winnie said. You can then talk. In the meanwhile, let us help you settle in. The guest room is yours for as long as you need it. Winnie brought me to a modest but nice room with a private bathroom. The windows looked out onto the yard, which was filled with beautiful hydrangeas. A photograph of Winnie and her husband from their younger years sat on the bedside table. They appeared cheerful, holding hands against the water. Take a shower, Winnie advised. I'll prepare dinner. You must be fatigued after all of this. Once I was alone, I unloaded my luggage and organized my belongings. Then I pulled out my phone and switched it off. I did not want to be monitored. Instead, I called Morton Fisk, an old colleague and financial advisor, via my room's landline. When Morton responded, I continued, My name is Eunice Trotter. Eunice. His voice conveyed real astonishment. I haven't heard from you in ages. How are you? I am not doing as well as I would want. Morton, I need your assistance and your restraint. Of course, his tone turned immediately serious. What is wrong? I described the incident, taking out any emotional specifics. I need to know the full condition of my money, including all of my investments, and I'd like you to look into Garth and Paige Trotter's financial position. Your son Morton was astonished. That is an odd request. I know it is, but I have reason to believe they are in deep financial difficulties, which directly concerns my safety. Morton was quiet for a minute. Okay, I'll see what I can find out. Your investments are stable. The portfolio we created 5 years ago is exhibiting strong growth. You now have around $380,000 in different assets, including a retirement account. I was relieved. At least I was not financially reliant on my son. Thanks, Morton. One more question. Have you heard about Amber Technologies? You bet I did, he shouted. Their stock price rose 20% in the previous month when they announced a new campus in Delaware. They're investing billions in this initiative. Where is your house in Henlope and Acres? I provided you the address. Damn it, Eunice. Morton whistled. You are sitting on a gold mine. This area is now the top real estate market. If you'd like to sell, I could. I forcefully interrupted him. I'm not going to sell, at least not now, or under pressure. I only need to know the true value. I see Morton said, "Give me a day or two, and I will compile all of the information and get back to you. And don't worry, I will be completely discreet." After speaking with Morton, I felt more assured. At least I had a job and the means to seek legal representation. Darrell Hall, Vinnie's nephew, returned for supper. He was a robust man of 45 years old, with a short haircut and attentive brown eyes. He listened to my account without interruption, occasionally taking notes in a little notepad. "So you want to establish that your sister-in-law fraudulently got the power of attorney and intends to illegally dispose of your property?" He clarified when I had done. "That's correct." I nodded. "I have no proof, only an overheard exchange." "That's insufficient for a trial," Darrell remarked carefully. "But we can collect more. I'll need to follow your sister-in-law record, her interactions with the possible buyer, and maybe even the notary who notarized the deeds." "How long will it take?" I asked. Darrell responded, "In a few days, maybe a week. It depends on how active she is. In the meanwhile, you should stay here and avoid contacting your relatives. What if they turn to the police?" I was concerned. I had left a quite unsettling letter. "It may complicate things," Darrell conceded. "If they report you missing, the police will begin searching for you. But we can utilize this to our advantage. When the inquiry begins, all of their acts will come under closer scrutiny. It will be more difficult for them to make an offer on your home while you are away." Furthermore, Winnie stated that if the cops arrive, we would just tell them that you are visiting an old acquaintance. You are an adult, and you have the right to leave your son's residence without explanation. I nodded, but I was still reluctant. Even though Garth had betrayed me, the prospect of caring for him devastated me. Regardless, he was still my son. The next morning, Darrell headed for Henlopen Acres to begin monitoring Garth and Paige's home. I spent the day speaking with the lawyer. Winnie had recommended Leonard Finch, an elderly guy with a gray beard and a smart intellect. He emphasized that if you did not specifically approve to your daughter-in-law administering your estate, a power of attorney might be nullified. If there is proof of fraud, we can seek a temporary suspension of the power of attorney while the situation is resolved. "What about the fact that I vanished, leaving an unsettling message?" I asked. "Couldn't they use this against me to demonstrate my mental instability?" "It's a two-way street," Mr. Finch remarked thoughtfully. "On the one hand, they may attempt to present you as emotionally unstable. On the other side, if the inquiry reveals that you overheard their plans to place you in a nursing home without your choice, this would work in your favor. You behaved out of fear to keep yourself safe." By late afternoon, Morton had phoned with an update on Garth and Paige's financial position. He answered, "The situation is not good, Eunice. They have a mortgage on their home, 2 auto loans, and nearly maxed out credit cards. To make matters worse, Paige appears to have become embroiled in a shady investment plan. In the previous year, approximately $80,000 has been transferred from their joint account to a firm that appears dubious. I proposed a pyramid scheme or a real estate fraud, which would not surprise considering her career. Whatever the case, they were in serious financial trouble. That explained their desperate desire to buy my house. They didn't simply want to profit from increased prices. They really needed money to get out of debt." When Darrell returned late that night, he had news that confirmed my worst concerns. "They've gone to the police," he added, entering the living room where Vinnie and I were drinking tea. "I reported you missing and potentially suicide, and I gave the authorities your note." I felt my heart tighten. Garth must have been quite concerned. Was this part of their plan? "How about the house?" I asked. "Paige was seeing a man called Jeffrey Bruckheimer at a downtown coffee shop today," Darrell explained. "I was able to sit near enough to record their talk. She was urging him that the sale needed to be closed as soon as possible, ideally by the end of next week. I mentioned certain difficulties with the current owner, which I guess is you, but told him that all will be rectified. She's planning to sell my house while I'm gone." I shook my head amazed. "That is ridiculous." Not really, Daryl argued. If she had power of attorney, she could potentially do so. The question is whether this is legal, and if Bruckheimer is aware of it. We need to stop her, I stated forcefully. And we will, Daryl said firmly, but we need more evidence. I'll resume my monitoring tomorrow. In the meanwhile, please stay here and do not contact anyone other than us. I couldn't sleep for a long time that night, wondering about my baby and how we had arrived to this point. When did he go from the kind youngster I nurtured to a guy prepared to betray his own mother for money? Or had he always been like that, and I simply didn't want to see it? This morning I awoke with a clear decision, no doubts or emotions. My task was simple: safeguard myself and my belongings against those who attempted to defraud me, even if they were family members. Garth Trotter arrived home later than normal on Thursday. The quarterly report had dragged on. His supervisors were dissatisfied with the results, and he had to rework the figures till late in the evening. When he eventually parked the car in front of the home, the clock was nearly 11. He wiped his sleepy eyes, anticipating a nice shower in bed. The home greeted him with unusual stillness. Paige was usually watching TV in the living room at this point, and his mother had most likely fallen asleep. He went to the kitchen expecting to discover something from supper, but there was nothing on the stove. That seemed weird. Paige always left him food even if she had already eaten it. "Paige," he said as he climbed the stairs, "are you home?" The door to their bedroom was ajar, and the light was on inside. "Here," she murmured in a strained voice. Garth stepped in and noticed his wife sitting on the side of the bed, holding the phone and looking anxious. "What is wrong?" he inquired, feeling something off immediately. Paige looked up at him and said, "Your mother." She vanished. "What do you mean by disappeared?" Garth frowned. "Where may she have gone, I do not know." Paige stepped up and gave him a piece of paper. "I discovered this on her bed when I returned home." Garth took and read the note. The blood drained from his face. "What's going on? What exactly does this mean? I overheard everything. Do not search for me where you intended to bury me alive." He stared at his wife, horrified. "What exactly was she talking about?" Paige shakes her head. "I do not know. She's been acting strangely the past few days. I tried to inform you, but you're always too busy. You should have insisted." Garth raised his voice and then drew himself together. "I apologize. What do you mean I'd rather die freely? Do you believe she—" "I've already contacted the cops," Paige said. "They should arrive any minute. I checked her room. It's disorganized, like if she was seeking for something. Perhaps someone was." She also handed him an almost empty jar of tablets, her sedative, which she had only received a week before. The police officers, a young sergeant with a worn countenance, and a young cop with a notebook posed conventional inquiries. When Eunice was last seen, whether she exhibited any unusual behavior, whether she was taking any medications, whether she had access to a car, and whether she had any friends or family to visit. "No, she does not have anyone here," Garth responded. "All her pals remained in Philadelphia, where we used to reside. We relocated here 5 years ago, and Mom just joined us last year, after Dad passed. She seldom socialized with anybody." When the cops left, promising to keep them updated, Garth dropped on the couch, hands covering his face. "How could this have occurred?" he murmured. "She seemed fine. A little quiet, perhaps, but... Oh, God, I should have noticed. I am her son, for crying out loud." Paige sat down next to him and placed her hand on his shoulder. "Do not blame yourself," she added quietly. "You could not have known. Depression in the elderly sometimes goes unnoticed. And the note, Garth. I don't mean to offend you, but it seems like she's having difficulty recognizing reality." "What do you mean?" Garth raised his flaming gaze to her. "Look at what she writes. I heard everything. Your intentions will bury you alive. It's like being paranoid. Remember how Mother would occasionally forget where she put something and accuse us of concealing it?" Paige said quietly but insistently. "I've heard that it can be an early symptom of dementia, as well as suspicion and paranoia. Tallulah, their 14-year-old daughter, entered the house at that very time when the front door opened. She'd returned from art camp where she had spent the previous 3 days. "Hello," she said, pausing at the doorway of the living room. "What is wrong? Why do you look like someone has died?" Garth and Paige gazed at each other. Garth responded, "Sit down, honey. We need to discuss." Tallulah quietly dropped herself into the chair opposite from them, her gaze fixed on their features. "Is something wrong with grandmother?" she inquired with a strained voice. "She vanished," Garth said. "We do not know where she is. How did they disappear?" Tallulah frowned. "When Paige apparently responded this afternoon. When I arrived home, she was gone. She left a really scary note." "Can you read it?" Tallulah asked. Garth handed out the note to her. Tallulah scrutinized it attentively before looking up to her parents. "What did she mean by your plans?" she asked plainly. "We don't know," Paige said immediately. She appeared to be having difficulty recognizing reality. "The cops believe she may be a risk to herself." Tallulah continued to gaze at them, as if attempting to read anything from their expressions. "She's not insane," she insisted. "Grandmother has always been more competent than most of the grown-ups I know." "Nobody is suggesting she's insane," Garth groaned, "but as individuals age, they change, and you may begin to have memory and cognitive issues." Tallulah responded, "She's only 73. She recalls everyone's birthdays in this home, including yours, Mother, which you forget every year. She assisted me with maths last semester when you were both too busy. She is not out of her mind." Tallulah rose up, clutching the note in her hand. "Could I keep this? I want to reread it." Why, Paige frowned. Tallulah answered, "Maybe I will notice something you missed. I've been conversing a lot with my grandmother recently. Leave the message here," Garth instructed. "The cops may want to see her again." Tallulah reluctantly placed the sheet on the table and proceeded to her room. The mood at the Trotter house remained strained for the following 2 days. Police investigated Eunice's home on Seaside Street, but discovered no trace of the elderly woman. The search spread to the nearby communities, particularly the beach and forested regions, where persons who opted to commit themselves were frequently discovered. Garth wasn't himself. He scarcely slept, continually checking his phone for a call from the cops. He'd gone out alone twice to seek for her circle his mother's favorite areas. Paige appeared equally as concerned. She coordinated the distribution of posters with Eunice's photo called hospitals and even contacted the local media. Her tone altered when she was alone with Garth, however. "We must be prepared for the worst," she remarked, sitting with him in the kitchen late one Saturday night. It had been 3 days given her health and age. "Don't," Garth cut her off. "I do not want to think about it. I understand." Paige covered his hand with her own, "but we need to be practical. There's something more we should consider about." What? Garth inquired tiredly. Paige spoke cautiously about her residence. "It's currently empty. If your mother died, you would be her single heir." Garth gazed at her. "Are you serious? My mother is gone and perhaps dead, and you're worrying about her home." "I'm thinking about us," Paige stated firmly. "About the future, about the children. We have debts, Garth. Large debts. My investment did not work out, and we lost nearly all of our cash. If we acquired your mother's house, we could sell it and finally solve our financial issues." Tallulah entered the kitchen at that same time. She paused in the doorway, moving her eyes from one parent to the other. "What are you guys talking about?" she asked. Paige swiftly replied, "Adult stuff. Why aren't you sleeping?" "It is late." Tallulah remarked, "I heard voices. Is there any news regarding Grandma?" "No." Garth moaned, "No news at all." Tallulah nodded and went to leave, but then paused. "Mom, did you mention anything regarding Grandma's house?" she inquired without turning around. Paige took a brief peek at Garth. "I only mentioned that we needed to keep an eye on it while Grandma is away." "Ah." Tallulah remained standing with her back to them. "I just assumed you were talking about selling." "You imagined it," Paige stated sternly. "Go to bed. It is late. Tallulah exited but did not go to her room. She carefully descended the back steps and snuck out into the yard. In the shadow of an ancient oak tree, she took out her cell phone and read a fresh message from an unusual address that had arrived an hour earlier. Tallulah, if you received this message, please phone me at this number, only when you are alone and able to talk freely. I'm your granny. To make you believe. Remember the secret you told me on my birthday? What about the boy in your art studio? I didn't tell anyone like I promised. Give me a call. Love you. Tallulah glanced around and called the number given. Hello? The voice was hesitant. Tallulah muttered something to her grandmother. Is that indeed you, Tallulah, my sweetheart? Eunice could detect relief in her voice. Yes, that's me. Are you alone? Can anyone overhear our conversation? Tallulah answered. No, I am in the garden. Grandma, what is going on? Everyone is freaking out. The cops are looking for you. Daddy hasn't slept for the third consecutive night. I understand, honey, and I'm sorry you're going through this, Eunice responded. But I had no option. I needed to disappear. But why Tallulah insisted? Why what happened, Tallulah? I need to ask you a question, and I need an honest response. Do you have any idea what your folks have planned for me or my house? Tallulah paused. Yeah, I just overheard Mom and Dad discussing selling your house. She said they were in debt and that selling would solve their issues. I see Eunice's voice has become rougher. Tallulah, I can't tell you everything right now, but your folks, particularly your mother, were plotting something that may severely harm me. I learned about it by mistake and determined to safeguard myself. Do they harm you? Tallulah frowned. How Eunice remarked, I overheard them talking. Your mother planned to place me in a nursing facility against my choice, sell my house, and steal the proceeds. She obtained power of attorney to handle my estate by falsifying my signature. Tallulah stuttered. That sounds like something from a horrible film, Grandma. Eunice sighed. Believe me, I was as astonished as you. But it is true, so I staged my disappearance to buy time and gather proof. What should I do? Tallulah sounded desperate. Dad is genuinely concerned about you. I understand, and I am sad he is suffering. But he let your mother control him, and I cannot risk that. The only thing I ask of you now is that you keep our chat quiet and notify me if you learn anything crucial about your parents' intentions, particularly those involving my house. Tallulah returned to her room and typed down the details of her chat with her grandma in her notepad. It took her a long time to fall asleep as she pondered what to do next. Meanwhile, in Winifred Oak's house, Eunice hung up the phone and turned to Darrell Hall, who was seated next to her and listening in on speakerphone. She asked him if she could be trusted. Darrell nodded, saying, I think so. She's a sophisticated girl who is definitely attracted to you, but you were right not to tell her too much. She won't speak. Eunice spoke strongly. Tallulah was always the most responsible member of that family. Darrell grinned. Anyway, we are making progress. I filmed Paige's talk today with this Bruckheimer man. They met at his downtown office. He took out a little tape recorder and hit the play button. Paige's voice came through. I appreciate your anxiety, Mr. Bruckheimer, but the power of attorney is completely lawful. I can provide all of the essential documentation. That's not the point, Mrs. Trotter, the male voice said. I am concerned about timeliness. You make a bid to sell the house just as the owner disappears under dubious circumstances. It may appear challenging. Paige argued that it was only a coincidence. In truth, my husband and I had been considering the notion of selling the house with his mother for a while. She simply didn't have time to properly give her approval previously. Well, it doesn't matter anymore. Legally, I can make the deal. And suppose she comes back? Bruckheimer inquired. Paige was silent for a second. The authorities believe that is implausible, considering the circumstances surrounding her disappearance. But even if she does, the power of attorney remains legal. It cannot be withdrawn without my permission till it expires or until the court declares Mrs. Trotter incompetent, which is quite likely given her age and previous actions. After 5 days of voluntary disappearance, it was evident that it was time to take action. I had already terrified Garth and Paige enough. Allow them to understand what it was like to live in uncertainty and terror. Allow Paige to worry if I discovered any evidence of her deception and gave it over to the authorities. But it was time to move on. Daryl and I set up in Winifred's living room, laying the collected documents and notes on the coffee table. Winnie made her trademark bergamot tea and joined us. "So what have we got?" Daryl started sorting the papers into tidy piles. First, Paige somehow secured a power of attorney. I checked with a buddy at the registrar office. The document exists, signed by Gilbert Tanner, Notary Public. I have never heard of such a thing. I shake my head. Not surprising. Daryl nodded. Tanner is regarded in certain circles as a guy who will turn a blind eye to certain irregularities in documents for a fee. Nothing tangible about him, but his reputation speaks for itself. So the power of attorney was forged, Winifred explained. Very likely. Mrs. Trotter, the signature appears similar to yours, but I am not an expert. To make an informed assessment, you'd need to see a handwriting expert. I took a copy of the power of attorney that Daryl obtained through his methods. Indeed, the signature was close to mine, with little variances that only I would have recognized. The second item, Daryl said, is the tapes of Paige's discussions with Bruckheimer. She definitely aims to sell the property as quickly as possible, taking advantage of your absence to expedite the process. And according to the latest tape, she is aware of Amber Technologies' ambitions. I added, which confirmed my concerns. She had heard about it earlier and decided to take advantage of the circumstance. Yes, although it's unclear when she found out, Daryl stated. It's critical to comprehend the big picture. I sighed and slumped back in my seat. It was all very theatrical, like a scenario from a daytime soap opera that my neighbor, Mrs. Parkinson, enjoyed watching. It was hard to comprehend that my own daughter-in-law and son would deceive me in such a way. "What's wrong with Amber Technologies?" I inquired, going back to the issue. "We know they intend to establish a college near my house, but what exactly are their plans?" Daryl grinned and retrieved another document from his folder. "This is when things become interesting. I phoned an old colleague who now works for the city's planning department. Officially, no information has been provided yet. However," he spread out a huge map of the area on the table. "This is where your house is," he indicated to a dot on the map, "and this is where Amber intends to develop its campus." I leaned over the map. My lot was just on the edge of the eventual development site. "They've already purchased the most of the land around here," Daryl said, "but your property is critical to their growth plans. If they acquire your land, they might construct an extra structure significantly increasing the functionality of the entire complex." "And how much would this cost?" I inquired, despite my suspicions based on Paige's eager gleam that night. "A realistic estimate," Daryl hesitated, "is $3 to $4 million, maybe more if you haggle." I whistled. That was 100 times more than Frank and I spent for the house back then. Bruckheimer was proposing too, as I indicated. Paige wasn't only attempting to cheat me, she was also trying to cheat him. Daryl nodded, as she always did, maximize profits while minimizing moral limitations. We remained silent for a minute, contemplating the issue. Then Winifred spoke up. "Eunice, have you determined what you will do with the house?" I paused. The house on Seaside Street was filled with memories. It was where Frank and I had spent the most of our lives together, where Garth had grown up, and where the rose garden containing my husband's ashes had been buried. However, I couldn't live there alone, since it was too much labor to maintain the house and garden. I'm not sure I responded honestly. Part of me would like to maintain the house for nostalgic reasons, but $3 or $4 million would allow me to live a nice retirement and maybe leave something for my grandkids. Tallulah is the only one who truly cares about me. Anyway, Daryl stepped in. "First, we must stop Paige's acts and establish that the power of attorney is falsified. You'll need a skilled lawyer for this." "I've already contacted Beatrice Quimby," Winifred explained. She specialized in matters involving real estate inheritance and fake paperwork. She will be here in an hour. Beatrice Quimby was a small, lively woman in her 50s with a short hairdo and sharp eyes behind trendy glasses. She listened to my narrative, looked over the documents and information Daryl had gathered, and went right to the point. A power of attorney may and should be contested, she asserted boldly. Even if the signature is identical, you are claiming you did not sign the paper. We will need a handwriting specialist, but this is not an issue. Furthermore, the fact that you fled promptly after knowing of your sister-in-law's intention to exercise that power of attorney argues to your favor. What about the fact that I staged my disappearance, I asked. Wouldn't this be used against me? It may be interpreted as a legitimate response to a threat, Beatrice answered. You learned that your sister-in-law intended to place you in a nursing facility against your will and sell your possessions. You became afraid and wanted to defend yourself. That is very understandable, and the note I left seemed a little exaggerated. It may be viewed as an emotional response to stress. Beatrice shrugged. The key point is that we can demonstrate that you were of sound mind and behaved sensibly to defend your interests. I nodded. The strategy was starting to take form. What should I do regarding Amber Technologies, I asked. Should I alert them about the situation? Beatrice considered for a moment. It could be strategically advantageous. If they discover they're dealing with a dishonest middleman, they might choose to bargain directly with you. But you have to be cautious. If they've already invested in the deal through Bruckheimer, the issue may get difficult. I can set up a meeting, Daryl proposed. I have a contact in the real estate development department. Unofficial, of course, but it may be an excellent starting point. Great, Beatrice nodded. In the meanwhile, I will file an application to withdraw the power of attorney. Mrs. Trotter, we will require your personal attendance in court, but we may postpone it until we have acquired all of the evidence. After Beatrice left Winifred, Daryl, Winifred, and I spoke about the next steps. It was arranged that Daryl would attempt to organize a meeting with an Amber Technologies representative in the following days, while I would remain at Winifred's place for the time being. Tallulah called that evening. She murmured gently, apparently concerned about being overheard. She muttered, "Grandmother, something is going on." Mommy does not sleep much. She spends much of her time on the phone. Dad is wandering around like a zombie, has been put on leave at work due to his inability to focus, and the cops arrived today with some printouts. Printouts, I was concerned. Yes, something to do with phone calls. They were chatting to Mom and Dad in the kitchen, but I overheard them. They stated that the last calls made from your phone were not in the beach area where they were looking for you, but rather in the direction of Lewis. I froze. Surely the phone companies could determine where the calls originated. I should have seen it coming. Mom informed them it was a mistake, that you didn't know anyone in Lewis, but they appeared to be expanding their search in that way. Thank you for the information, honey, I replied. You're really perceptive. Tallulah, grandmother, sounded concerned. Will the cops locate you? Probably, I responded honestly. But that's okay. We will have a plan by then. And then what will you return home, I wondered. Where may I go? To my son's home where I had been betrayed, to my former residence, which will likely be sold soon. I'm not sure, love, but don't worry. I won't vanish from your life. After chatting with Tallulah, I informed Daryl and Winifred. It complicates everything, Daryl scowled. If the authorities broaden their search in that way, they may find us within the next several days. Maybe it's for the best, Winifred said. Eunice has not committed any crimes. She is an adult and has the right to be anywhere. Perhaps it is time to quit hiding and come out into the open. Not so soon, Daryl protested. First and foremost, we must provide legal certainty. If the police discover Mrs. Trotter before we've gathered all of the evidence and filed a petition to dissolve her power of attorney, Paige may be able to pull off the deal. I nodded, agreeing with his rationale. Then we'd need to go quicker. Daryl attempted to schedule a meeting with Amber Technologies as soon as feasible. I want to know what they have planned and how important my story is to them. Daryl went the next morning to meet with his Amber Technologies contact while I stayed with Winifred and studied the documentation Beatrice had left behind. I had to sign a document withdrawing the power of attorney and testify before a handwriting expert. Around midday, Daryl called me. He said that a meeting had been scheduled for 3 p.m. today at the Blue Oyster Cafe on the outskirts of Luez, as casual as possible, out of sight, out of mind. Who will represent Amber, I asked. Someone called Elliot Price, the Deputy Director of Development. He is in charge of obtaining land for the future campus. I outlined the scenario in general, stating that you were the true owner of the land, that your sister-in-law was attempting to execute an unlawful deal through a frontman, and that you were prepared to engage directly. Did he believe it enough to agree on a meeting? This site must be quite essential to them based on his speedy response. Daryl and I headed at 2 p.m. for the Blue Oyster Cafe, a tiny bayside restaurant popular with local fishermen and a few visitors. Winifred stayed at home. We believed that fewer individuals would appear less suspicious. Elliot Price was a tall man in his 40s who wore an expensive but not flamboyant suit. He was waiting for us at a table in the cafe's far corner with a cup of coffee in front of him and a small file of documents. Mrs. Trotter. He stood and shook my hand. It is good to meet you. Mr. Hall has previously informed me of your difficult predicament. We sat down, ordered coffee, and got down to work. Let me get this straight, Price said. Are you alleging that your sister-in-law, Paige Trotter, is attempting to sell your Seaside Street home without your permission, using a falsified power of attorney? That's right. I nodded. And not just sell it considerably below market value through a front guy, one Bruckheimer, who I suspect intends to resale it to your firm at a significant profit. Price frowned. We did negotiate with Mr. Bruckheimer for numerous lots in that neighborhood. He identified himself as a real estate agent working for a group of owners. He's lying, I stated firmly. I am the only owner of the house at 42 Primorskaya and have never committed to sell it. My sister-in-law took advantage of my infirmity over the winter to get a forged power of attorney, and she is now attempting to complete the transaction while I am temporarily gone. Are you temporarily absent? Price lifted his eyebrow. According to my understanding, the police are searching for you as a missing person, potentially with suicide thoughts. It's part of my sister-in-law's strategy, Daryl explained. She is attempting to portray Mrs. Trotter as mentally ill in order to bolster her position on the power of attorney. Price fixed me with a long, scrutinizing stare. Do you understand, Mrs. Trotter, that these are serious claims and that your disappearance may be seen as weird behavior? I understand well, Mr. Price, I said, looking him right in the eyes. But when I overheard my own son and his wife discussing putting me in a nursing facility and selling my home, I didn't have many options. I chose to leave to gain time and gather proof. We have tapes of Mrs. Paige Trotter's talks with Bruckheimer, Daryl explained, in which she clearly admits to hurrying the sale of the house before your campus was formally announced. She is aware of Amber Technologies' ambitions and is attempting to capitalize on this knowledge. That sparked Price's interest. Can I hear the tapes? Here. Daryl took out his phone and played one of the recordings, which showed Paige informing Bruckheimer that costs were set to increase due to the Amber Technologies announcement. Price listened closely, his expression becoming very serious. It's an issue, he added as the recording concluded. Until our initiative is publicly disclosed, we will keep all information about it totally discreet. The fact that your sister-in-law found out about it raises concerns. I shrugged. She's a realtor. I guess she has some sources, maybe, Price said, nodding. However, this does not change the fact that she is attempting to utilize insider knowledge for personal advantage, which might constitute a violation of securities laws if she or someone around her invested in our company's shares. He remained silent for a minute, analyzing the matter. Mrs. Trotter, tell me honestly, are you willing to sell your house? And if so, Under what terms? I took a big breath. This was the moment of truth. I'm willing to think about it, I said thoughtfully, but only under particular circumstances. First, the pricing must reflect genuine market worth while taking into consideration your company's ambitions. Second, I wish to keep the right to the rose garden behind the home where my husband's ashes are spread. Third, I want the transaction to be fully transparent and lawful with no involvement from my daughter-in-law or son. Price nodded and took notes in a little notepad. These are appropriate words. Regarding the pricing, you are aware that your land is of great importance to us because to its position. We are prepared to make an offer of $3.5 million, he said. Even with our plans, this is far higher than the market value. Despite the fact that my insides were spinning upside down, I attempted to maintain a calm appearance on my face. $3.5 million would radically transform my life and Tallulah's future. It's an intriguing proposition, I explained gently. Regarding the rose garden, we may insert a stipulation in the contract to maintain that section of the property untouched. Price nodded. In truth, our plans do not include any development of that area of the land. There would be a green space between the campus and the residential neighborhood. How about the timeline? Darrell asked. Mrs. Trotter is unable to openly announce her location due to legal issues with her power of attorney. We may write a preliminary letter of intent with a proposed price. That would allow you time to resolve the legal difficulties while also guaranteeing that the property would not be sold to someone else. We talked about a few more things, and at the end of the discussion, Price gave me his business card. I'll report our chat to management, he said. I believe they will be interested in a straight purchase without middlemen, particularly given the unclear position with Mrs. Page Trotter and Mr. Bruckheimer. As Darrell and I went back to Winifred's house, I felt a peculiar combination of emotions, relief that things had progressed, resentment at my family's treachery, and unexpected exhilaration at the idea of a new life ahead of me. What are your thoughts? Darrell inquired, casting me a brief glance. I believe that is an excellent deal, better than I could have hoped for. But before I sign anything, I need to address the power of attorney and my disappearance. Beatrice stated that the application to withdraw the power of attorney will be ready tomorrow, as Darrell reminded me. You can come forward formally once it has been filed. And what am I going to tell the police? My son. I looked out the window at the trees and homes drifting by. I apologize. I simply chose to vanish for a week after overhearing my son and his wife discussing putting me in a nursing home. The truth, Darrell responded simply. Sometimes it works best. When we returned, Winifred met us with a troubled expression. What is wrong? Darrell inquired quickly, recognizing her anxiety. Tallulah called, Winnie said. The cops have focused their search to Lewis. They are interviewing locals and showcasing Eunice's image. It's only a matter of time till they reach that house. 2 weeks of intentional exile transformed me more than the previous 10 years. It was as if a curtain had dropped from my eyes, revealing what my life had become after Frank's death. How I had allowed myself to become a gutless old woman who could be shoved into a corner, patted on the head, and ignored for her ideas. In the days afterward, Beatrice Quimby and I had submitted a formal application to remove the power of attorney, accompanied by a handwriting study that confirmed my signature was forged. Darrell had finished his research gathering enough evidence of Page's schemes, and I had 2 more meetings with Amber Technologies, which resulted in a tentative deal that much surpassed my expectations. Finally, the day arrived when I chose to return, not as a battered dog, but as a man determined to get justice. Are you certain you want to do it this way? Beatrice inquired as we debated a course of action. We could resolve everything in court without engaging in personal conflict. I'm very certain, I answered. Page deserves to be publicly exposed, and Garth wants to know who his wife truly is. Thanks to Tallulah, who continued to be my eyes and ears at my son's house, I knew Paige had booked a meeting with Bruckheimer for 4 p.m. this afternoon, directly in their living room. Garth was supposed to come, but from what my granddaughter informed me, he was still sad over my abduction and refused to participate in any of the procedures. At 3:30 p.m., I got out of Daryl's car, which was parked around the corner from my son's house. Daryl remained behind the wheel, ready to help me if required. Beatrice was standing next to me with a leather file folder. I was dressed simply but tastefully in a dark blue suit I had purchased from a local boutique. My gray hair was nicely combed, and I was wearing a pearl necklace, a present from Frank for our 30th anniversary. "Ready?" Beatrice asked. I took a big breath. More than ready. We strolled along the familiar street, and I could feel the people watching me from behind their curtains. The story of my absence had most likely been the primary topic of town talk for the previous 2 weeks. Before stepping out the door, I texted Tallulah, "I'm here. Be ready." Then he determinedly strode up the stairs and rang the doorbell. Tallulah opened exactly as we had promised. Her eyes brightened with delight despite the fact that she knew I was approaching. "Grandmother." She threw herself about my neck and I embraced her hard. "Hello, darling," I grinned. "I am back." "Who is this?" Tallulah Paige's voice sounded from the living room. Tallulah stared at me and I nodded. "It's Grandma." There was quiet followed by fast footsteps. Paige Garth and a strange man who I instantly recognized as Bruckheimer came in the corridor. King. Mom Garth gazed at me as though I were a ghost. His face looked emaciated, and the rings under his eyes were heavy from sleep. "Hello, Garth," I replied quietly. "Paige, so you must be Mr. Bruckheimer." Bruckheimer seemed perplexed, turning his glance from me to Paige and back again. Eunice Paige was the first to interrupt the stunned stillness. "Oh, God, where have you been?" We were freaking out from concern. Her tone was flawless. Concern, relief, and delight. But I could see the whiteness of her fingers, holding the file folder, as well as the frantic twitching of her eye. "I'm sure some of you were worried," I said, looking at Garth and Tallulah. "Others may have been more interested with selling my property as quickly as possible." "What exactly are you talking about?" Paige attempted to chuckle, but it came out nervously. "We were afraid. The police. The search. Paige, your message made us think the worst." Garth spoke gently, glancing at his wife. "What house is she talking about?" Paige shrugged. "I have no idea. She's clearly not herself. Look how she vanished, leaving a message like that, and now she reappears as if nothing happened with an allegation." Unhinged, I grinned. "I'm curious how soon you arrived at that diagnosis." "Almost as fast as you chose to place me in a nursing home and sell my house. I found out about Amber Technologies' development ambitions." Bruckheimer became noticeably agitated when Amber Technologies was mentioned. He began by addressing Mrs. Trotter. "Maybe we should postpone our meeting." No, Mr. Bruckheimer." I raised my hand. "Please remain. What I'm going to say concerns you as well." I looked to Beatrice, who discreetly gave me a packet containing paperwork. "Allow me to present my companion, Beatrice Quimby, a real estate and probate lawyer." "A lawyer?" Garth expressed his confusion. "Mom, what is going on?" "I will tell you what is happening on." I opened the folder. 2 weeks ago, I overheard you and Paige talking. You were talking about placing me in a nursing facility and selling my house using a forged power of attorney that Paige had acquired somehow. What Garth turned to his wife. "What's she talking about?" Paige said swiftly. "She's delusional. You said that she could have dementia. I have proof." I grabbed the first document from the folder. This is a handwriting expert's analysis, confirming that the signature on the power of attorney I allegedly granted Paige is forged. I held it out to Garth, who accepted it with quivering hands. "I never granted Paige power of attorney to administer my estate. The paper she is using was signed falsely. When I was sick with pneumonia, she made me sign a purported medical paperwork." Garth carefully moved his gaze from the page to glance at his wife. "This is ridiculous, Paige," she shouted. Her voice shook. "Of course I hold power of attorney. Your mother signed it in her own thoughts and with good conscience. Then maybe you can explain it. I took out the following document, a copy of the phone chat with notary Gilbert Tainer. Mr. Tainer, I need you to certify the document retroactively. Yes, I understand it's not quite legal, but you've done something similar for me previously. Page's face became white. Where did you obtain it? I have pals. I grinned. Very capable buddies. I looked at Bruckheimer, who was becoming increasingly uneasy. Did you aware, Mr. Bruckheimer, that you were buying a house from a guy who had no legal right to sell it? Yeah. He paused. Mrs. Trotter assured me that the power of attorney was completely lawful. Mrs. Trotter, Jr., I correct him. And she lied to you. She also lied about a number of other things, including the notion that the house is worth $2 million. Page swiftly responded, that is fair market value. Really, I went back inside the folder. According to the most recent valuation, which took Amber Technologies' campus plans into consideration, the land was valued at least $3.5 million. I'm wondering where the difference would go. Your debts page, or the questionable investment program in which you invested $80,000 of your family's money. Garth turned swiftly to face his wife. You stated we lost money on the stock market. We did, and Paige defended herself. It was simply an investment in a private firm that turned out to be a pyramid scheme. I completed. I looked into it. Orem Invest has been under SEC investigation for 3 months. There was a profound hush in the living room. Bruckheimer was the first to break it, coughing and getting up from the couch. I suppose I should go. Apparently there are some family issues to be resolved here. Jeffrey, wait. Page grabbed his arm. It's simply a misunderstanding. We can explain anything. I am afraid not, Mrs. Trotter. Bruckheimer responded harshly. I don't participate in dodgy deals. My name and reputation are too important to me. He turned to face me. Mrs. Trotter Sr., please accept my apologies. I was unaware of the issue. I believe you, Mr. Bruckheimer. I nodded. And I appreciate your candor. When Bruckheimer departed, Paige reacted with the rage of a cornered animal. She spat at you, saying you wrecked everything. We could have had it all: money, a new home, and a new life. So now what? Will we be back in debt with you on our necks? Paige, Garth gripped her shoulders. Say nothing. Simply shut up. He looked at me, and I saw a mix of astonishment, embarrassment, and sorrow in his eyes. Mom, I did not know. I promise I had no idea about the fraudulent power of attorney. Yes, we discussed selling your house, but I expected you to agree once you learned about our troubles. I said calmly, your wife chose not to wait for my consent. She figured it was easier to get rid of me and take the house. We should get rid of the elderly woman and sell her home. Isn't that what she stated that night? Garth lowers his head. I didn't think. I didn't understand what she meant. Oh, quit your pitiful whimpering, Paige said. You understood exactly what she meant. You just decided to ignore it as you usually do, allowing me to do all the dirty labor while you stay the good son yourself. That is enough. Garth increased his voice. No more lies, Paige. I never promised to defraud or forge documents. Yes, I wanted Mom to sell the house to help us pay our bills, but not like this. Not like that. He turned to face me. I promised Mom I had no idea the power of attorney was being forged, I thought. God, I'm not sure what I was thinking. I glanced at my kid, who was damaged and bewildered, desperately clinging to what remained of his dignity. Part of me wanted to forgive him right away, soothe him and assure him everything would be okay. But the other half, the one that had spent 2 weeks plotting retaliation, couldn't get over his treachery so easily. I told Garth that you might not have known every detail, but you knew enough. You were aware that your wife intended to send me to a nursing home against my choice. You knew she wanted to sell my house, but you didn't stop her. Garth remained mute, acknowledging the reality of my statements. What happens now? He eventually asked. Are you going to sue us? Not you, I said. Paige is. Beatrice has already drafted a fraud and forgery lawsuit. Additionally, copies of all evidence will be forwarded to the Delaware Realtor Licensing Board. I believe Paige is about to become a former realtor. Paige yelled, You cannot do that. This is my career. This is my life. And you were going to damage mine, I said harshly. Call it karma. I glanced to Beatrice and nodded. She pulled another document from her purse. I went on to say that I had already reached a provisional arrangement with Amber Technologies for the Primorskaya residents. They get a portion of the property for their college, while I get to keep the house and rose garden. The agreement is for $700,000. Paige coughed on $3 million. You got nearly $4 million and got to keep the house. That's correct. I gave myself a tiny smile. It turned out that they only wanted the back of the lot for an extension, not the entire property. Now I looked to Tallulah, who was quietly watching the entire scenario. I'd like to chat with my granddaughter alone. Tallulah, will you accompany me to your room? Tallulah nodded, and we headed up the stairs, leaving Garth and Paige in the living area. As soon as the door shut behind us, I held my granddaughter firmly. You were so courageous, sweetie. I am so delighted you are back, Grandma, Tallulah murmured. It's been difficult. I know, I touched her head, and I'm so sorry you had to go through that. I drew back and stared into her eyes. Tallulah, I'd want to give you something. I'm returning to my home on Primorskaya and would be delighted to have you reside with me, if you want to, of course. Tallulah's eyes widened. Really? How about Daddy and Mommy? I answered that you're old enough to choose where and with whom you wish to live. Of course, that would have to be discussed with your father, but I don't see why he would disagree right now. What about the school? Will I be allowed to stay at the same school? Of course. My residence is just 3 miles away and in the same school district. Tallulah considered for a bit before nodding emphatically. I want to live with you, grandmother. Here. It's going to be terrible here after today. I understand, dear. I exhaled. I am sorry it had to be this way. We walked downstairs and saw Garth sitting on the couch with his arms about his head. Paige was nowhere to be seen. Where is Paige? I asked. She departed. Garth responded muffled. She said she needed to think. He glanced up at me, his eyes red with weeping. Mom, I'm not sure what to say. Don't say anything, I said. At least not right now. We both need time. I turned to face Beatrice, who was patiently waiting at the entrance. Beatrice, I am ready to leave, then return to Garth. Tallulah and I are going together. She'll live with me. What Garth lifted his head, but it is out of the question, I stated firmly. At least not today. You may pay her a visit whenever you wish. However, she need a stable home at this time, which will not be provided here. Garth simply nodded, too fatigued to protest. Tallulah, get the necessities I instructed. We will pick up the remainder later. Tallulah walked upstairs, and I gave my kid a long look. Garth, I'm not sure whether we can ever go back to the way things were. What happened? It's not easy to forget or forgive. I understand, he said gently. But you're still my son, I added, and I will always love you even if I cannot trust you right now. Perhaps in time. He muttered, thank you for not closing the door completely. Tallulah, Beatrice, and I arrived at my house on Seaside Street half an hour later, driving in Daryl's automobile. Tallulah nestled into me as I looked out the window at the familiar streets of Henlopen Acres floating by. What will happen to Daddy and Mommy? Tallulah inquired after a lengthy quiet. I don't know, sweetie, I said honestly. It is up to them. What conclusions will they reach, and what choices will they make? And what happens to us? I grinned and placed my arm around her shoulders. We will be all right. We have the house, the resources, and each other. The rest will arrive. As we approached my house, I felt strangely excited. It had been about a year since I had passed its doorway. Paige was always finding reasons why I shouldn't go there. The home was being aired cleaned, or the heating system was being tested. Daryl opened the front door, and we walked inside. To my amazement, the house was clean and comfortable. No dust, no neglect. Winifred had taken care of everything as I prepared to return. Welcome home, Beatrice said, shaking my hand goodbye. I'll call you tomorrow to talk about the following legal steps. When Beatrice and Daryl departed, Tallulah and I went through the house to the back porch. The day was fading into twilight, and the bay glistened in the setting sun. Frank had planted a rose garden years ago, and it was in full bloom as if to welcome me back. Tallulah sat on the ancient wicker swing and said, "It's beautiful here. Yes, I agree. Your granddad adored this vista. We often sat here in the evenings, gazing out over the ocean and fantasizing about the vacations we would take when we retired. Did you travel?" I shook my head. Not as much as I had hoped. There were always excuses to put it off, such as job, family, or worry. But then Frank became ill, and there was no way. Tallulah took a careful glance at the horizon. "And now you can travel now, right?" "You have money," I said, smiling. It seemed so straightforward and apparent coming from a 14-year-old. "Yes, I can travel now." "And you know what? I believe we can accomplish it together. How about going to Paris during the autumn break?" Tallulah's eyes brightened up. "Really? Are you not kidding? Completely serious." I nodded. Life is too brief to put your goals on wait. I've only recognized this in the last 2 weeks. Tallulah nestled into me as we sat in silence, watching the sun slowly dip into the bay, turning the water gold and purple. For the first time in a long time, I felt calm. Not only had justice been served, but I had finally recognized that at 73, my life was not coming to an end, but rather a fresh beginning. Perhaps not as I had imagined old age, surrounded by loving children and grandchildren, in a house full of laughter and warmth, but beautiful in its own right, with newfound freedom, the opportunity to fulfill pent-up dreams, and the opportunity to build a relationship with Tallulah based on mutual respect and love. And who knows, perhaps one day Garth will find the strength to change, to own his faults, and to return to my life not as a lost son, but as a mature man willing to accept responsibility for his actions. Meanwhile, I had my house, Frank's rose garden, my intelligent and sensitive granddaughter, and a whole world to explore. I took out a little notepad from my pocket, the same one I had used to write my escape plan 2 weeks before. Now, on a blank paper, I wrote Paris, October. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself a genuine grin.